Good afternoon to the people who are with us in person in the room and also to a very large online audience. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever it is, wherever you are. I'm Roland Green, Director of the Stanford Humanities Center, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event presented as part of our ongoing series, All This Rising, the Humanities in the Next 10 Years. As I said, in addition to those of you who are here in Leventhal Hall, we have a lot of people in the online audience, including many former fellows, and we're always glad to have former fellows able to rejoin us for our events, whether in person or more often these days remotely. But whoever you are, if you're watching us remotely, please tune in often. We love to have you join us. The aim of this series, which is one of several that we introduced about 4 years ago, is to deliver attention to ideas and methods that will mark new paths for the humanities in the next decade. The name of the series comes from a poem by Fred Moten in his book, All That Beauty. All this heroic rising above not hearing, and this rising in absolute north against the grain. From the first speaker in the series in 2020, the classicist Daniel Padilla Peralta, in 2022, the political theorist Adam Getachew, who is with us here today. She happens to be a fellow with us this year. This series deliberately, consciously, affirmatively explores work that goes against grains and makes a case for the future, as in today's lecture. Before we begin, I'd like to mention to our remote audience that real-time captioning is available. Please click on the closed caption icon on the bottom of your screen where it says CC to start or stop viewing the captioning. The up arrow next to the CC icon permits you to show subtitles, view the full transcript, and adjust captions as needed. By way of briefly introducing this institution, let me say that the Stanford Humanities Center has two homes. One of them is this building at the center of the campus, where we house a large number of fellows working on their own projects. This year we had about 50 of them under the roof. We sponsor 15 continuing research workshops, which together over the course of the year hold about 150 events connected to interdisciplinary research topics. The vast majority of those events take place in this building. And we offer events like this one that are open to the Stanford community and beyond. Our second home is our online platform at shc.stanford.edu, where our community expands to include not only current but past fellows, not only current graduate students, but our past students who have gone elsewhere. Not only today's visitor, but past visitors with whose work we remain in contact. And of course, future fellows, future visitors, future students in a public that extends from California around the world. Of the activities I mentioned, the research workshops and the public events, they take place mostly in this building, but they have a hybrid component too, and often involve populations that far exceed our capacity in this room or in any physical space on campus. Last year alone, we had 71,000 online viewers. You're here today because you're interested in David Brown's topic, Negotiating Whiteness, Shakespeare Studies, Digital Humanities, and Popular Culture. To learn more about these issues when the event concludes, you may wish to visit our digital platform and follow the link to our partner, the Center for Spatial and Textual Analysis, known as CESTA, to find out about some of its many projects in digital humanities. On the same platform, you may visit Arcade, our digital salon featuring high-quality intellectual work in open access format, and look at two examples there of what we call colloquies, or collections of recent articles, book chapters, interviews, and videos on a given topic. Right now, there's a colloquy in process on Shakespeare and Cervantes, another one on the future of the public humanities. Other topics include arts and justice, the right to a creative city, and many more. As we envision it, our two homes, the physical building and the virtual space, together make a new Stanford Humanities Center. Only this year's fellows have keys to this building, but all of you, whoever you are, in person or remote, have keys to our virtual home, shc.stanford.edu, and it's open 24/7. Before I introduce Professor Brown, I'd like to remind you there will be an opportunity for Q&A after the talk, and I hope that those of you who are here in Leventhal Hall will join us for the reception afterwards. And for the members of our virtual audience who would like to submit a question to the speaker, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will do our best to get to it following the lecture. And also, please note that today's lecture is being recorded. David Sterling Brown's book, Shakespeare's White Others, appeared from Cambridge University Press in late 2023, opening, I think, a new era in the study of race in the early modern period. Brown argues that the whiteness at work in Shakespeare's plays is a large-scale project continually under construction, including intraracial white-on-white tensions rooted in many of the issues we have long recognized in Renaissance literature, such as what is proper conduct, what is friendship, what is love, and that in turn Blackness is often implicated in this construction of whiteness, even in plays that involve no Black characters, in ways that should engage our attention as part of the anti-racist struggle of our present day. In 2021, Professor Brown received the Mellon ACLS Scholars and Society Fellowship that led to his year-long residency with the poet Claudia Rankine's Racial Imaginary Institute, of which he remains a curatorial team member. In the fall of 2023, he launched a virtual reality art gallery and exhibition, Visualizing Race Virtually, specifically devoted to exploring Shakespeare, race, gender, racialized sound, and more through the resources of the Folger Shakespeare Library. The exhibition is an interactive, immersive, visual complement to the new book. Currently, Professor Brown is working on his second book, titled Hood Pedagogy, which will be also published by Cambridge. David Sterling Brown is Associate Professor of English at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, where he teaches Shakespeare, English Renaissance drama, and critical race studies. We've been anticipating this visit for a while. We made the invitation a long time ago. David, it's a delight to welcome you to Stanford for the first time.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much, Roland, for the invitation to be part of the Stanford Humanities Center community this week. It is truly an honor. I also want to thank Eric Richard Ortiz for facilitating my visit and being such a gracious host yesterday. I had a nice time just kind of prancing around the facility here and also getting to hear a talk that I'll reference. And then I want to thank the humanities staff and fellows for welcoming me yesterday. And I also want to thank you all for being here, as well as our online audience. This talk today is going to include a reading, a somewhat meta reading of my book to bring you into Shakespeare's White Others via selections that outline the book's two theoretical concepts, the white other and the interracial color line. The reading will in part showcase my book's connection to historical events and also popular culture, though there are many ways we can think about the latter. And you can feel free to ask me about that during Q&A. I love talking about that connection. This reading will be essential for your introduction, or for some of you who've been in the gallery already, a reintroduction to the visual complement to my book, The Virtual Reality David Sterling Brown Art Gallery, that offers its visitors, as Roland said, an interactive, immersive experience, especially when you use 3D goggles. We don't need them today, and I'll show you how you can access it without them. But the Virtual Reality Art Gallery visit, there'll be an opportunity for you to see my book's digital humanities connection, but also see how the concepts from the book are applicable to art, as well as things beyond art. And so again, I would also like to thank the American Council of Learned Societies, as well as the Mellon Foundation, for facilitating this art gallery, as well as the creation of my website. And so I will go ahead and start. And before I do that, though, I do want to acknowledge something that yesterday I had the pleasure of being introduced to this vibrant community. And Dr. Ruth Mayer, who is here in the audience, she gave a talk on backwardness. And backwardness is something, a concept, as I was listening to Ruth speak, that actually is very relevant to how this book came to be for me. First, Shakespeare's White Others ends with a letter that I wrote when I was 18 years old, as I was being racially profiled by police in my neighborhood. So I wrote a letter to the mayor, police chief, and commissioner, and I will read that part of the book at the end. But then secondly, my introduction begins with an epigraph that's borrowed from Claudia Rankine's provocative play, Help, that she put on in 2022 in New York City. And there's an epigraph that I take from her play that says, "This is why to stay alive, forget thriving, I need to negotiate whiteness." And that's really what crystallized a lot of my thinking in the book. And so I'm delighted to share this with you today. So the title of the preface is called "You Better Recognize Othering Whiteness." Within Shakespeare's studies and literary studies, and outside of those realms, as in other academic disciplines and within the real world, the white other matters. This figure is a covert tool for maintaining what bell hooks describes in Black Looks, Race, and Representation as the dominator, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal culture. Specifically, the white other contrasts with idealized hegemonic whiteness, reinforces popular and evolving stereotypes about racial Blackness, and helps reify the imagined superiority of the whiteness defining what early modern scholar Peter Erickson calls white self-fashioning. More significantly, the white other indicates how attitudes toward whiteness are mediated through Blackness and Black images, whenever necessary, in order to reinforce the goodness and supremacy of hegemonic whiteness. Images of Blackness appear as distant or estranged from whiteness through the white other construct. In this book, I argue that such mediation creates racialized boundaries between white people along lines of superiority, inferiority, in-group, out-group, familiar social and psychological dichotomies of inclusion and exclusion that generate racialized harm. In so doing, the white other serves as proof that the commodification of Blackness, often exploited as a dehumanized resource, can occur in a range of everyday locations and in the subtlest ways. In The Origin of Others, Toni Morrison observes that one learns othering not by lecture or instruction, but by example. It is that easy. One learns by example. Morrison adds that racial identification and exclusion did not begin or end with Black people. This reality helps make sense of how and why whiteness is itself a nuanced racial category. As philosopher Michel Foucault suggests in The History of Sexuality, the value of racial whiteness was determined and still is determined through exclusionary processes of othering that facilitated the differentiation of people along lines of blood and skin color. By design, this kind of white estrangement occurs at Black people's expense, historically through violence of some kind. In a way, then, one could say that when Blackness, as in race, or Blackness, metaphorically speaking, collapses into privileged whiteness, it presumably reduces the latter and thus produces the image or idea of the white other. If it is true that control over images is central to the maintenance of any system of racial domination, then one cannot deny that what audiences receive from Shakespearean drama participates in a racist dynamic that privileges whiteness and devalues Blackness. Although racially white, the white other can at times or always seem foreign and strange in comparison to whatever is deemed normal. In Shakespeare's tragedy Hamlet, for instance, the hero's emblematic Blackness, signified by his inky cloak and accompanying unmanliness, is disturbing, a stark contrast to his deceased father's celebrated valiant whiteness, which I discuss in chapter 2 of the book. Shakespeare creates distance between those white people who conform to social expectations and norms and those who do not. In other words, there are white people who register as more legitimate than others in the plays, a matter that Patricia Akimi, a Shakespeare scholar, addresses in her article, Fair Bianca and Brown Kate on the Taming of the Shrew. Those people who conform or act as exemplars of hegemonic whiteness are tolerated, even revered, whereas those who do not conform are shunned, killed, critiqued, expelled, or marginalized. Although quite different than a fictional Black character like Aaron from Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, the white other who occupies a liminal space between Black and white helps sustain the racial hierarchy because their whiteness does not conform to the ideal. Furthermore, the white other's role alleviates the need for significant inclusion of Black characters in Shakespeare's canon, since these racialized white figures are strategically designed to embody some form of Blackness. Undeniably, whiteness is the dominating force in the racial hierarchy. By aiding the white superiority narrative, the white other enables racial whiteness to become more noticeable, particularly the positive symbolism of whiteness. I say this because Shakespeare offers correctives to the troubled moments where the dominant culture's standards of whiteness are not upheld. For example, the difference between Titus Andronicus's fair-skinned, virtuous Roman Lavinia and fair-skinned, lascivious Goth Tamara, whom we might consider socially dead because of her barbaric, blackened identity, because of Tamara's sexual association with Aaron, a Black Moor, because of her defeated enemy status, and because of her alien culture. Within Shakespearean drama, one can witness white privilege operating among groups of exclusively white people. Produced through a white supremacist orientation, such harder to detect operations of white privilege make the white other a powerful mechanism of white racial and racist construction. Occupying a space between whiteness and Blackness, the white other's presence generates and solidifies anti-Black sentiments. This figure is a literary and perhaps real force that transports ideas about white racial superiority and the metaphorical superiority of whiteness within a given play's framework. With respect to anti-Blackness, othering whiteness also exposes what is wrong with promoting notions of colorblindness. Moreover, othering whiteness complements discourse suggesting that colorblindness is harmful in social, cultural, political, pedagogical, and theatrical practice. Other characters then see this Blackness in the plays and they respond to it accordingly, negatively. They do not deny the presence of Blackness because acknowledging it actually benefits whiteness. The acknowledgement of the white other's Blackness, I posit, induces symptoms of insecurity because these other white characters destabilize white norms and generate racialized anxiety in the dominant culture. These moments of insecurity call attention to the privileging of whiteness as a dangerous trope. Moments of white privilege, or what Claudia Rankine has suggested we call white dominance, do not always register as such, since people are not conditioned to consider this phenomenon from an intraracial standpoint. Shakespeare's White Others asks you, dear reader, to do the hard anti-racist work. And so just to step back from that for a second, when I think about the main concepts from the book, The White Other and the Intraracial Color Line, I'm building on work there from W.E.B. Du Bois and the Souls of Black Folk and his interracial color line. I'm also thinking about double consciousness and how that works in both his texts, but even with respect to the intraracial color line. So I'm really interested in these white on white dynamics that play out in Shakespeare's plays and also in our modern world. And the intraracial color line is a necessary tool for helping us understand how the white other then comes into being. And I'll explain that now as I skip over to the introduction to a section that's titled, and this is a nod to Michael Jackson, It Does Matter If You're Black or White Other. What does it mean to be Black, white, or white other? And why does it matter? In 1991, the late global pop superstar Michael Jackson asserted in the chorus to his wildly popular song, Black or White, that it doesn't matter if someone is Black or white. With Black and white being the extreme ends of the racial hierarchy, the added implication, as suggested by the song's music video visuals, was that the racial backgrounds of everyone in between Black and white do not matter either. Jackson's idealistic song followed significant 20th century social, political, and cultural moments that exposed the pervasiveness of global white supremacy and or responses to it. South African apartheid, the Harlem Renaissance, Brown versus Board of Education, the American Civil Rights Movement, the Black Arts Movement, and the Black Power Movement, to name a few. Moreover, Jackson's song emerged around other significant socio-political moments, such as the end of Nelson Mandela's lengthy imprisonment, the infamous Rodney King beating, and the 1992 LA riots. Jackson's racial equality anthem, which was created because of global and anti-Black racism, today sounds more like a confirmation of a hopeful dream deferred, especially in light of the 2012 killing of Trayvon Martin on my birthday, February 26th, and the 2013 inception of the Black Lives Matter movement that continues to be relevant and necessary and will be so indefinitely. Ironically, Jackson's Black or White exists precisely because race matters. Everything in between Black and white matters too. Amplifying colorblind rather than anti-racist or color-conscious ideals, when the song's featured rapper LTB declares in his final verse, "I'm not going to spend my life being a color," Jackson's Black or White, which contains positive, if sometimes naive messages about race and racism, registers like a harmonious fantasy that elides the incredible authority of white patriarchal power and white supremacy, phenomena Jackson's music video calls attention to throughout, though it is unclear if that is all deliberate. On the heels of the song's release, overt anti-Black racism and violence persisted. Such racism is arguably even more visible now in the post-racial 21st century, in part because of how easily racist content moves across the internet and the globe. If it was unclear or seemed irrelevant to some people in the late 20th century when the world first heard Black or white, it is certainly apparent now that being white matters, as does being Black and all that lies in between. Being Black and being white is important for the racial hierarchy. That it matters and how it matters is an integral premise of this book, which situates itself among a range of scholarly and non-academic work invested in anti-racism and or undoing the invisibility of racialized whiteness, texts such as Arthur Little Jr.'s Shakespeare Jungle Fever and his most recent edited collection, White People and Shakespeare, Ian Smith's Race and Rhetoric in the Renaissance and his most recent Cambridge University Press book, Black Shakespeare, Crystal M. Fleming's How to Be Less Stupid About Race, and even D.L. Hughley's satirical text, How Not to Get Shot and Other Advice from White People. Racial Blackness and whiteness are understood today as social constructions rather than biological realities. Even so, race still matters significantly in virtually all conversations that involve human beings. To understand this reality, one must consider what it means to be Black and what it means to be white. For the white other exists precisely because of those two racial categories. To that end, I want to just mention how I'm thinking about Blackness in this text, since both white and white other depend on the devaluing of it. With Toni Morrison's Playing in the Dark in mind and Kim Hall's examinations of Blackness as a guide, I deploy Black, as in race, and Blackness metaphorically here with respect to the denotative and connotative Blackness that African peoples have come to signify, as well as the entire range of views, assumptions, readings, and misreadings that accompany Eurocentric learning about these people. How the Black person, and literal and metaphorical Blackness gets written about and read, informs anti-Black ideas and even the socio-political reception of real Black people. Morrison's attention to what she calls the carefully invented Africanist presence in literature resonates with how Hall uses Blackness and Black to cover both social practices and cultural categories that then allow her to discuss Black Africans and African descended people across time and space, then and now, here and there. I find Morrison's and Hall's attention to Blackness and Blackness metaphorically to be useful aids for establishing the parameters defining the Black-white binary, as I consider what lies in the gray area between those two racialized categories that are treated as racially oppositional. That gray area is where I locate the figure of the white other, much like a character named Hero in one of Shakespeare's plays, who was metaphorically blackened and sent into a pit of ink. And so with that, I want to now turn to the first chapter of the book before I get into the art gallery and really help you see how this all works gets put into action in the gallery space. And there's an image, a lovely image that I have in the piece from Macbeth that we'll take a look at that will give you a sense of how both the intraracial color line and the white other are operating visually, even within the art. But first, I'm turning to the first chapter, which is titled Somatic Similarity, the White Other, and Titus Andronicus, because this chapter is where I really start to help my readers see how they can engage with the intraracial color line and the white other concept, even though Titus Andronicus, Shakespeare's first tragedy, is a play that also contains a somatically Black character. Initially, it was a play that I didn't think was going to work for me in my assessment of just how the interracial color line and the white other are operating in Shakespeare's plays, but it actually works out quite beautifully because when we have those three divisions, thinking about Black, white, and white other, we just get to see how this sort of amplification of the anti-Blackness happens in relationship to both the white other and the Black character in relationship to the sort of ideal white figure. And this chapter begins with two epigraphs. The first is from the Racial Imaginary Institute curatorial team. Given that the concept of racial hierarchy is a strategy employed to make visible what has been intentionally represented as inevitable, whiteness is an important aspect of any conversation about race. And then the next epigraph from an edited book titled The Racial Imaginary, edited by Beth Lafreda and Claudia Rankin, reads, realize one might also make strange what seems obvious, nearby, close. Even when racial similarity exists in the form of skin color, one can still find in early modern discourse racialized difference that affirms the reality of the racial hierarchy while hinting at its instability. Thus, I begin this chapter on Titus Andronicus in an unlikely place with Shakespeare's Macbeth, a tragedy that is set in Scotland and centers white people and their experiences. I want to highlight briefly how Macbeth exemplifies several of this book's concerns in relation to gender, genre, domesticity, mental well-being, anti-Blackness, power, violence, and of course, intraracial tension. Through the application of my intraracial color line theory and the white other concept, I discovered that Macbeth has an intraracial couple beyond what critic Amy Scott Douglas refers to. And this interracial couple is always a pairing that signals racialized conflict in Shakespeare. In this dramatic work, there is fair and noble hostess, Lady Macbeth, who embodies masculine qualities, and there is Black Macbeth, as he's referred to in Act 4, Scene 3, who fails to embody strong white patriarchal masculinity, as his wife complains in Act 1, Scene 7. The dark, less than ideal Macbeths are obvious white others, along with the play's several murderers and MacDonald, a Scottish rebel who is killed by Macbeth and does not appear in the play. What these different figures have in common, beyond revealing themselves as uncivilized, violent white people, a woman and men, are their sinful violations of whiteness. The Macbeths execute the killing of their esteemed domestic guest, King Duncan, and they violate hospitality code. MacDonald, similar to the previously mentioned historical figure Robert Devereux, organizes a rebellion against Scotland. And the murderer characters, noted in the dramatis personae, are responsible for the deaths of Banquo and of Macduff's family. For their betrayals of whiteness, one can, in a sense, call them all race traitors, a topic I touch on in the conclusion. As these characters do not adhere to contemporary standards and expectations of white hegemony. Moreover, they engage in white on white violence. These are a couple of the reasons that in an image that I have in my art gallery, and it's also in the book, and I'll show you that, they are separated from the whiter looking background figures, and they blend in color-wise with a slaughtered beast on the banquet table that you'll see in the image. And that image separates the Macbeths from their peers. With respect to understanding the intra-racial color line and the white other, Macbeth's three witches, the Black and Midnight Hags, articulate what I read as a useful theory that underscores the potential for less than ideal, uncouth whiteness to exist. At the play's onset, in unison, they declare, fair is foul, and foul is fair. The integration of foulness and fairness, read respectively as synonymous with Blackness and whiteness, synonyms I explore in chapters 2 and 3, illuminate a gray area where whiteness polices Blackness to negotiate its own meaning in the absence of Black people. Like Richard III, who finds himself so far in blood that sin will pluck on sin, Macbeth finds himself in blood stepped in so far by the play's climax, reminding us on which side of the intraracial color line to situate him at that point in the play. So we actually see him shift from being on the right side of the intraracial color line to becoming on the quote unquote wrong side of that line after he becomes a murderous sinner. Well, we'll not analyze here everything that makes Macbeth a suitable text to reread through the critical lens that defines Shakespeare's white others. I must emphasize a key observation. Macbeth's conflicts make him a fascinating case study because he crosses the intraracial color line and is, like the Roman and Goth characters in Shakespeare's Titus, a convertible white figure. In this case, he begins the play on the right side of the intraracial color line, so to speak, policing villainous whiteness as a respected member of the dominant culture. Eventually, he becomes one who has Black and deep desires, as noted in the play, thus representing the kind of whiteness that needs eradicating, a blackened whiteness that Macduff eventually does destroy. Unlike Malcolm, a kingly figure in the play, whose retained white goodness enables him to erase the Black scruples from his soul, Macbeth can do no such thing after killing his king and Macduff's family because he permanently mars his presumably once good white soul. What's done cannot be undone, to quote Lady Macbeth. As Macbeth and Titus demonstrate, through imagination and through images, the white other becomes. Through their diminished racial whiteness, the white other becomes metaphorically Black. As a result, they may even become blackballed or blacklisted, Black somehow, somehow Black, in ways that perpetuate the casualness of anti-Black racism and that sustain the centuries-old myth of white superiority. So I'm going to pause there for a second before I get to the conclusion, and want to take you into the virtual reality art gallery that I have, which is accessible through my website. If you go to davidsterlingbrown.com and then click up the top here, VRV exhibition. So I can just show you briefly what this creation of mine entails, and also give you a little tour of it. So it's featured on the Mozilla Hub's platform. And once you access it, you just click join room. If anyone has a laptop, and I know people don't usually bring those to talks, but if you have one and you want to go to the website, you're more than welcome to. The gallery actually holds 50 people at once. So you can be in there with me as well. So it's just davidsterlingbrown.com. And when you join the room, you'll get an avatar that will help you navigate this space. If you were actually wearing, say, MetaQuest 2 virtual reality goggles, that would allow you to really be immersed in this space. So you could look around, see the ceilings, and look at the art, and even just kind of literally walk around this space. So I'm going to enter the room, and going to back out of it for a second so you can get an idea of what this looks like. But this is the gallery space, and I conceptualized this and then worked with a digital specialist at UCLA, Francesca Albrezzi, who basically allowed, and I see we've got some people joining it, so that's good. Maybe they're online as well. But she helped me create this. But everything that you see, from the physical structure to the curation of the art exhibition, that was done by me. And so I'm going to enter into this space and just kind of give you a little tour of it. In here, we have a welcome video, and the title of this, actually, is there a way to get the sound up by any chance? But the title of the exhibition is Visualizing Race Virtually. And I decided to come up with this as a compliment to the book, because even today, there are a lot of people, one, who don't know that we can talk about Shakespeare and race. I think my colleagues and I are doing our darndest to make sure that people are aware that the field exists. But even so, there's still been just folks in the general public, for instance, who aren't so fully aware of Shakespeare and race. And so that's something that I'm trying to sort of change here through the gallery space. But the exhibition is titled Visualizing Race Virtually. And right now we're in the welcome room. If I turn around here, you can see that there are some other avatars in this space as well. And so I use this as, yes, they're a bit funny. You can create your own, but there are people right now in the gallery space moving around with me. And the gallery features several sections. This space over here is called the study. And one thing that I do here is introduce people into the book's concepts, but also show them how they work outside of the book. And so there's a piece that I penned here for Claudia Rankin's Racial Imaginary Institute website on some text message communication of Tucker Carlson's that was revealed. And this is done just to show people, again, that the concept of the white other and the interracial color line are not limited to Shakespeare's plays. They're not limited to the early modern period. They very much function in our modern world. I've also got a guest book that people can sign virtually over here, as well as my favorite quotation by W.E.B. Du Bois from The Souls of Black Folk. I sit with Shakespeare and he winces not. And then there's a stage, because one of the things that I do with this space is actually hold class in it sometimes with my undergraduate students. And so we'll use this space as a place to kind of play, if you will, and think about race. I outlined the key concepts from the book, which I won't go over here because we have done that in the talk, but I want to show you this Macbeth image before I get to the conclusion reading, because this image encapsulates what is going on in that play very well with the concept of the white other and the interracial color line. So if you'll notice at the top left, there's kind of a diagonal line of light that you can see that's basically separating the background and the foreground. And in the foreground, we have the dark, less than ideal Macbeths, who are the obvious white others. On the table here, we have the Bois image. And so there's a delineation between these sort of idealized white figures in the background who obviously even appear to be lighter colored as opposed in terms of their shading. And there are three figures there that I'm sort of circling around here. And then, of course, the devious, sinful Macbeths, not just their dark clothing, but again, being on the same plane as the Boar helps us see how these figures are detached from ideal whiteness. And that Boar image is really there to show us the distinction. The gallery features 3 rooms and 39 images from the Folger Shakespeare Library. And so I feature 7 plays in here, including Much Ado About Nothing, Richard III, The Merchant of Venice. And these rooms are designed to help people orient themselves into the concepts from the book. So whether you begin with the book or not is irrelevant. Part 2 of the gallery shows us the white other and the interracial color line working together. And so there are some anchor images. For instance, this image of Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus is one that allows us again to see, even though we have that sort of triangulation of black, white, and white other here, with the figure of Aaron the Moor in the center, protecting his baby, you notice that these figures are wearing, the 2 black figures are the sort of lightest colors clothing or cloth, the white cloth in the frame. And that's really something that's allowing us to see the concept of the white other at play too. And then the final section of the room is part 3, Hamlet Code Black. So again, giving readers and visualizers of the gallery an opportunity to see that they can map the concepts from the play and the book onto a play like Hamlet. Patricia Parker, who is a colleague of yours at Stanford University, she's written about Hamlet and Blackness as well. And also Peter Erickson, whom I mentioned previously, he has a great piece called Can We Talk About Race in Hamlet? And so thinking about these historically white plays as being part of the conversation about race is what we open this up to when we think about the white other and the interracial color line. And then lastly, we have the pedagogy and research room, which is an opportunity for people to, one, see visually the analyses that students of mine at Trinity College have done about the art in the art gallery. So again, trying to show people that this is for anyone who wants to participate. You don't need to be a Shakespeare scholar to understand how these concepts work. And then the gallery also features a bookshelf as well as some resources that allow people to, again, have access to the conversation about Shakespeare and race. And on the bookshelf here are just books that I cite in Shakespeare's White Others, but also more importantly, they're works that have inspired my thinking about this work. And so this is the art gallery. I encourage you to explore it on your own if you'd like, and give yourselves an opportunity to, again, see how you can map the concepts from the book onto the art that is in the gallery space. And I'm happy to take questions about that when we finish. And so I want to just turn now to the last section of the book that, again, sort of takes this out into the world and allows people to see that this conversation doesn't have to be limited to Shakespeare studies or the early modern period. And so this is where I end with this memoir-esque version of my narrative, which in this section, it's titled DWB, Sincerely a Frustrated Citizen. As I conclude this book, I think of James Baldwin, who asserts in Why I Stopped Hating Shakespeare that his relationship then to the language of Shakespeare revealed itself as nothing less than his relationship to himself and his past. The same is true for me. While growing up in late 20th century, predominantly low-income South Norwalk, Connecticut, which was deeply affected by the police magnets that were the crack epidemic of the 1980s and the gang activity perpetrated by the Latin Kings and other organized groups in the 1990s, I learned about violent death by age 4 or 5, definitely by 1989, well before I knew anything about Shakespeare and how his early modern tragedies would teach me about senseless murder and centuries-old anti-Black violence. Even though I did not have the sophisticated technical language to articulate my perceptions of the world as a child, I learned empirically that bullets and guns and the people who use them kill. And they do irreparable physical, emotional, and psychological harm as they inflict damage on the human body. Growing up within the Du Boisian Vale, in my Connecticut hood prior to its faux posh capitalistic rebranding as Sono, and its subsequent 21st century gentrification that made it safer and more palatable for white people, I learned, contrary to Michael Jackson's 1991 racial equality anthem, that it does indeed matter if you are Black or white. I learned that the notion of bullets not having names on them is utterly false. I learned also that it never seems that way for people who are Black, people with Black skin, Black boys, Black girls, Black women, and men. This was hood pedagogy. Thus, I grew up and sometimes still live wrapped tightly in anxiety with the fear that the bullets will find me because of whatever I am doing while Black. It don't matter what. Even now, very now, I could simply be reading, teaching, or writing about Shakespeare when the bullet suddenly becomes the trigger. Imagine that. For that reason alone, I was acutely aware and need you to be acutely aware of how much was at stake in producing this book. The stakes for me, my parents, my family, my culture, my race, my field, my students, my colleagues, and even you. I always had to be careful, remaining aware of the not so simple fact that there is always a bullet ready to have my name on it. All I have to do is make that one wrong move, the one move that becomes the right move for the trigger to be pulled, so I then bleed out like my Black brethren, David McCaddy, Alton Sterling, Michael Brown. Whatever I'm doing while Black, it rarely ceases to feel like I am dodging bullets in this comedy of terrors that does not keep the law from breaking Black people like me, even when we do not break the law. If at times this book reads as though it was written like my life depended on it, make no mistake about your assumption. Truthfully, I sometimes feel like I am on the dramatic trajectory of one of Shakespeare's tragic protagonists. Act 5 is inevitable, and I am running out of time. We are running out of time. For me, one of the most distressing things about being a Black adult, if I am to be frank, is living daily with a traumatic, infantilizing childhood fear that the bullets will find me, no matter what I am doing while Black. Hence the sense of urgency around getting these ideas out of my body. I could not let them die, not with me. I must die without them. Thus, with the presentation of one last artifact, I explicitly want to drive this conversation back to the comedy of terrors, what I see as a genre of racial misfortune for Black people and for white people and those with internalized whiteness, whose racist delusions or systematic suppression of the truth keep reality at a distance. I feel inclined to conclude this book by sharing a poignant story as it touches on many of the topics I converge in this study. I use this final chapter as the vehicle to publish and share this story, my story, because in many ways it inspired and informed the critical, personal, experiential nature of this book. Moreover, I share this story to situate it in conversation with the intersecting critical, personal, experiential, anti-racist discourses within pre-modern critical race studies, Shakespeare studies, genre studies, critical whiteness studies, social psychology, Black male studies, Black feminist studies, sound studies, and other fields and spaces devoted to undoing white supremacy while exploring racial formation. In 2001, as a 17-year-old Black kid from South Norwalk on the verge of adulthood, I found myself in a position all too familiar for people driving who share the same somatic mark of Blackness, especially in America. That is, driving my very first car, mind you, while Black. Repeatedly stopped 4 times by 3 different police officers over the course of 6 months between December 2001 to June 2002 during my senior year of high school, I, a Black adolescent, responded to antagonistic police the safest way I felt I could. I wrote. I penned a letter for my future and the futures of people in my neighborhood who looked like me. With stories of anti-Black police violence sealed within the book and volume of my brain, then, I penned a letter, quite literally, to save my life, or at least buy me some more time, in hopes that I would not one day find myself in the terrifyingly tragic position of Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, or Philando Castile. Black body, Black person, riddled with police bullets. While the what ifs I anxiously allude to in the letter's conclusion have yet to become my reality, the same is not true for so many Black people mentioned in this book and not mentioned in this book. With the permission of my vulnerable teenage self, to whom I dedicate this book in part, I end Shakespeare's White Others here by sharing with you an early 21st century letter I wrote to the police commissioner, mayor, and police chief of my hometown, South Norwalk, Connecticut, a place that after 2002 has not fully felt quite like home, safe. And the subject of the letter is Larson Street, Internal Two-Way Conflict. I, David S. Brown, am an 18-year-old African-American who lives on Larson Street in Norwalk. I have been stopped by 3 different police officers on 4 separate occasions for committing alleged traffic offense. I say alleged because there seems to be a misunderstanding with regard to definition. On December 29, 2001, I was stopped by a police officer as I was on my way out of the street toward the intersection of Larson and South Main Street. The police officer stopped next to my car and told me Larson was a one-way. I attempted to tell him that it was not, but he insisted that he was correct. I didn't argue. He let me go and gave me a warning. I later told my father, who went down to the police station on December 31st and gave a copy of the attached diagram, which is included in the book, from the Norwalk Traffic Authority to Officer Yolanda, who was at the front desk. Having never had this problem before, my father assumed that would be enough. 3 months later, I was stopped on March 22nd, 2002, around 9 p.m. This officer was the same one who stopped me in December. Having given me a warning in December, he took action this time. He told me that I must back up my car and turn around. Annoyed at the situation, I backed my car into my driveway and sat there. His vehement tone troubled my nerves. And as I backed my car up, I hit my passenger side rearview mirror on my gate. My car was slightly damaged because of an incident that should have never occurred. Approximately 6 hours later, the day now being March 23rd, Officer Evans stopped me for a 3rd time. She stopped me for committing this alleged traffic violation, going the wrong way out of a one-way. This time I was prepared, so I thought. I had the attached paper from the Norwalk Traffic Authority that clearly explains with coherent words in a simple diagram the legal way for traffic to flow in and out of Larson Street. When she finally came to my car, she asked me, "Whose car is this?" She also asked me, "Why is she, my then girlfriend, in the back seat?" A question that I feel in no way related to the reason I was stopped. I hesitantly answered her anyway. Once again, my nerves were shaken. I had just been stopped for the same alleged infraction hours before. This was also mentioned to Officer Evans, who had an obvious lack of interest in any of my comments. When I showed her the paper from the Norwalk Traffic Authority, she said, "Okay, this paper is dated from 1998. She claimed that the paper was not valid because it was from 1998. This I did not understand because it was still the same street. The Constitution was written in 1789, so does this mean that it too is invalid? Can't believe I asked that as an 18-year-old, but I did. And she ultimately issued me a ticket for committing this alleged traffic violation. Later that morning, my father had a telephone conversation with Officer Lysaby in regard to the incident. He also spoke to Officer Evans' supervisor, Sergeant Katori, in the afternoon around 4:15 p.m. Sergeant Katori assured my father and I that this situation would be taken care of. 3 months later, on June 23rd, 2002, another male officer stopped me again at about 12 in the afternoon. He pulled up next to my car and said, "Do you know that this is a one-way?" I answered him by confidently saying, "No, it is not." He said, "Yes, it is. So I think you need to turn around before someone comes by and messes up your ride." Tired of playing the yes it is, no it is not game, I complied with the officer's request because this situation, quite frankly, has made my nerves weary. He waited at the end of Larson and Woodward until he saw me turn my car around, and then he left. I must add that I did not feel as though I were being spoken to as if I were the intelligent individual that I am. I guess he assumed that by me being a teenager from South Norwalk, I would comprehend those words better, words that I felt were demeaning. Larson is not a one-way, it never has been. In 1998, 4 years ago, the Norwalk Traffic Authority placed do not enter signs at the intersection of Larson and Woodward Avenue. I do not understand why it has not been a problem until now. By the straightforward laws of definition, Larson Street was no longer a two-way street because of the do not enter signs. Thus, it became an internal two-way street in 1998. There are no one-way signs on either of the four corners of Larson Street. There never have been. In order for any street to be a one-way, it must fit the definition of that type of street. Larson Street does not. The fact that I have been stopped 4 times is indicative of the failure of some individuals' ability to observe the definition of a simple term, respect common citizens, and reason logically and socially. I appear to be a typical male from the hood, frequently wearing a do-rag to cover my braids. I am not. It seems to be too much of a coincidence that I'm the only individual on my street that has ever been stopped by the police for this alleged infraction. I am the only one who looks like me. I hope I am not being profiled. I look forward to my complaint being dealt with. I want my words to be read, not looked at. I want this situation to be mollified, not ignored. I want the irritation and aggravation to end before any hypothetical situation that is fathomable occurs. So please, let's take care of this before the what ifs become reality. A frustrated citizen, David S. Brown. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions, both in person and online.
Sounds good.
Thank you so very much for this talk, and I just want to briefly acknowledge that. Okay, I just wanted to briefly acknowledge that you started by generously referencing the backwardness concept, and in the end, you're coming back to it so kind of with so many nuances by talking about not only your kind of traveling backwards to this moment in time, but also with this concept of the one-way street that really is not, you know. Yeah. So it's picking up this image and complicating it because there is, of course, a back and forth in time and in space that this is all about. So, I mean, it's just, it resonates so well with the larger panorama that you opened up, that I just wanted to acknowledge it. It's not really a question.
Thank you so much. No, I appreciate that. And I would just add to that, you know, something that I didn't think about when you were talking about backwardness yesterday is, I guess in reading the letter, it triggered this for me, but how trauma requires us to sort of be in this space of moving backward and sort of reflecting on, because of course, this experience that I had, it was certainly traumatic. And it took me a while to not be afraid of police. But the trauma there and constantly going back to that moment as I even move forward in my life, it took me literally about 17 years to not be so afraid. And so I just loved what you brought to our attention yesterday, because it made me think about how not just the book itself was a place that started from me for me from that point of the letter, and then trying to think, how do I get to that letter through Shakespeare, through critical race studies, through Black feminism, but also how do I get to it in a way that it's going to resonate with other people outside of this discipline, as you just said. So thank you very much for that.
So thank you very much, David. Unfortunately, I somehow managed to mistake the time.
Oh, okay.
But in the time I was waiting to come here, I was reading your book.
Oh, thank you.
I didn't do too badly. So I have a question for you, and it's from my read, and you perhaps have touched on this already.
Sure.
What is the place of religious othering in the white others? So the making others of whiteness, because of course, religion, infidels and Turks, and these metaphors abound in Shakespeare. Is there a confluence between religious modes of othering and this the process you describe in the book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so no, there's definitely a connection in the book, right? I think in the introduction about Shylock, for instance, and the Merchant of Venice. So thinking about Jewishness and also anti-Semitism. And I don't have a chapter that delves deeply into thinking about religion, partly because I want to keep this as much as possible centered on just that dynamic between white, other, and idealized whiteness, if you will, and Black. But religion comes into play because we can also think, as you mentioned, Turks, right? We can also think about Moors and how there were Moors people who are Moors, referred to as Moors rather, who might have been considered white. And so there's definitely a way that religion factors into the concept of the white other, because it's not just about skin at all. Skin is obviously a requirement to be the white other, but we're thinking about the ethical implications of their being, the moral implications of their being. So these characters can become blackened. And so I think about Shylock in The Merchant of Venice, right? The concept of circumcision is something that we can think about as marking certain people as white other, if you will. Does that help?
Yeah, of course it does. It does. But related to the religion as a form, an instrument of othering, also is class.
Yes.
So if you take class and religion, of which there are many examples in Shakespeare that they are deployed for othering purposes, what does this do to your concept, which I found very attractive, of the white other? So someone might say, well, he should really be talking about class.
Someone has said that to me already.
Okay, so what's your answer?
Not here. But someone has mentioned that to me before. And I do bring up class in the book because you have to remember, or at least I have to remember, when we're thinking about whiteness, there's almost this like chameleon aspect to how race works. It shifts, right? So Hamlet is a great example of a character who is of royal lineage, right? But he's a character who figures as the white other in my book. So class it's not that it is irrelevant, but it is not a defining feature of what makes somebody a white other. Again, you can shift in and out of that. I think about Macbeth is also a great example. He becomes king by means that are not right, but at the same time, even as he moves into that position, he still occupies the position of king. He still occupies the space as white other in that play. And that is why at the end of the play, we have to get rid of him, because we have to restore the play, not just the play, but also the landscape of the play, to this concept of idealized whiteness. And we see that it tracks throughout the plays that I've looked at in the book, as well as plays that I don't touch on in the book.
I have a last question, but I'll ask you later.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I definitely really liked your letter at the end, and thank you for sharing that. I love when scholars insert themselves into their work. I think it's really, really great. And I'm thinking about this idea of like the one-way street and the two-way street, and kind of passing in and out of whiteness or white otherness. Like you talked about, Macbeth kind of passes into white otherness as the the play progresses. And I'm wondering about to what extent this is like a permeable boundary of whiteness and white otherness, and also if it's something that's usually covert or if it's something that other characters tend to perceive, like they can see that this person is not as close to whiteness as they are, or as the ideal of whiteness is.
Yeah, oh, I love that question because it's complicated. So when you were talking, the first figure that popped into my head, and so I'm just going to roll with that one and see how this goes. Iago is a figure who is, in that play, a less than ideal white figure, both because, I mean, he even sort of sees himself as that and is frustrated by Othello's decision not to promote him, right? And so there's something to be said about his professional inadequacy in that play, which can or cannot be a factor in terms of thinking about his white otherness. But also, when we're looking at his, what I call his intercourse discourse, and how he violates and literally sexually abuses these characters in the play rhetorically, that is obviously morally wrong behavior. It's ethically wrong behavior. And so we see this character's sort of darkness, again, being contrasted even with Othello's. But Othello is somatically speaking, he's the darkest figure in the play. Yet we wouldn't necessarily think to call him black and bad, and that's what he gets reduced to until he kills his white wife, right? Then it's like, oh, excuse me. Then it's like we're so much focused on that, when in fact the whole time we're watching this play, well, my mom is watching, so she'll just have to forgive me, but I'm about to swear. I refer to this section where I'm thinking about Othello and Iago as, it's called In Bed with Iago, Mind Fucking White Men. And what I'm couching there is how Shakespeare really does position Iago as this psychologically manipulative figure. There's nothing good in that. And we see at the end of the play how his position, where he is, and how these other characters see him, they want to go after him because he does not find himself, of course, and they see him for who he is at the end of the play, on the right side of the intraracial color line. So thank you for that question.
Great, thank you for the talk. And I just wanted to ask about, I mean, you mentioned this via Macbeth in particular, but other characters as well, about the way people move from one category to the other. And so it calls to mind a certain account of sort of racial plasticity, right? That these categories aren't, immutable in some form, but there's like something about race that's plastic in some form. I wondered how that plasticity is registered. What are the mechanisms? Is it moral? Is it kind of moral, ethical? Are there other ways in which that plasticity comes to the fore in some of the plays that you're looking at?
Yeah, so I love that question too, because it's very broad in terms of how this gets applied, but it doesn't always get applied across the spectrum at the same time, if that makes any sense. So for instance, I'm thinking of Hamlet sartorially, so we're thinking about clothing in that play. The blackness of Hamlet's clothing, his inky cloak, he refers to himself as being a character who is too much in the sun. What happens when the white body is in the sun? It gets darkened, right? And so there's a way that biological realities of just what happens for us physically can matter in terms of thinking about this concept of the white other. Also emotion. Emotion is a big one. In Hamlet, the character is referred to by his uncle Claudius as having unmanly grief. Grief is a concept that is associated, so grief, mourning, concepts that are associated with blackness. Also think about like geohumoral theory, right? And so Hamlet's internal emotional blackness is also contributing to his positionality as a white other. And it's not just that. Hamlet also does not embody the ideal masculine qualities of his time. So thinking about what early modern folks valued, stoicism, right? Men, we're thinking about sort of hyper masculinity. We're thinking about, of course, being quick to act in terms of violence. Hamlet thinks, and he thinks too much in that play, and it costs him and it costs the other characters. But what I love about Hamlet is that that play is bookended by examples, and they're the only two examples in the play of idealized whiteness. So, and one of them is not even in the play proper, and that's first of all his valiant deceased father, who is referred to as majestic and most royal. There are these moments in the play where we're getting attention to his body as well that shows us just how esteemed he was. And I believe it's Rosencrantz who says in the play as well that the cess of majesty dies not alone, but like a gulf doth draw everything near it with it. And so we see in that play how the poisonous and the poisonous effects that they have on old Hamlet, they're not just limited to him. It infects the body politic because there is no strong male leader in that play until we get to the end, when we get the introduction of young Fortinbras, the Norwegian prince, who comes in to again represent and stabilize white masculinity in that play. He even says that Hamlet would have proved most royal if he didn't die. So again, we're starting to see how Hamlet is created in contrast to a figure like young Fortinbras in that play. Sorry, just got me excited there. Another great example from that play is, of course, Polonius's son. He has a moment when he says that when he sheds his tears, then the woman will be out. So like all these characters are embodying things that are not defining of what sort of masculine values were in the period. And that contributes to this idea of their white othering. Yes.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is your point of view makes me want to reread all the plays and apply this
That's
filter.
an ultimate compliment. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Quick question is that the concept of race traders, right? So which they have such a either they get humiliated or died or vilified in all the plays. Do you think that moving into real life, which you just did at the end of the talk, is that why, for instance, the police officers don't want to become those race traders vis-a-vis a young 16 or 18-year-old kid and stay in the line within their own persona? Or how do you think of this concept of race traders, both in the literature and then in real life, which I'm assuming that's your next book is going to be about that?
I can tell you about the next one. So the concept of race traders is interesting for me. One of the things that I was trying to do with this book is undo a lot of things that get mapped onto the non-white figures, both in the plays, but also in our world. And so it is entirely, right, we have this phrase, black on black crime, right? That does a lot of work when it gets deployed in the media. Rarely, if ever, do we hear the phrase white on white crime, but it does in fact happen too, all right? And so the same thing with the idea of race traders and this notion of betraying one's race and also loyalty to it. I would love to sort of collapse the boundary there in terms of thinking about someone who might not be being loyal to the Black race or loyal to the white race, so that we can maybe get back to this idea of our shared humanness. But if I'm understanding your question correctly, one place that I go when I think about, you were asking a question about the police, right? I haven't written about this anywhere, but one thing that I think is interesting is how we don't have an equivalent of the sort of number of deaths, right, that have happened to, say, like Black men when it comes to police violence. And most of, as far as the statistics go, most of those state-sanctioned violence is disproportionately perpetrated by white police officers. And so for me, I wonder sometimes if it has to do with the fact that I can't kill my brother, if that makes any sense. Like, I see myself in you, because there's like, why is Dylan Roof still alive. But we have a slew of names that we could throw out in terms of thinking about people who haven't gone into a church and killed parishioners, but they're no longer with us. And so I think that part of it has to do with that seeing yourself and sort of maybe having that moment of pause, but also again thinking about the work that the white other does, thinking about anti-Blackness. There's a lot that stereotypes in our world do to generate fear. Why is anyone who's carrying a gun, I'm thinking about a police officer, afraid of someone who's not? That makes no sense. But when we look at what's happening with race, or even just sort of the color-coded Blackness in these plays, it's generating fear, it's generating anxiety, and I think it makes it that much easier for someone to react to that Blackness, if that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Is there another question?
I had one more.
One more, and then I'll start concluding. Go ahead, Michael.
I first of all, that was a lovely presentation and performance. I'm very taken by the Blackness and Whiteness, and I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that chapter in particular, because like Hamlet's inky cloak, these images, color and in the abstract was a very important mode of representation. In the early modern theater, you have Tamburlaine with his tents that are white and then red and then black. So there was this sort of processional logic to color in it at the time. And I was wondering, some of your examples that you give would definitely have been interpreted as racial logic at the time in contemporary standards and contemporary sort of understandings of race. And I think the intraracial color line is very interesting. But sometimes I wonder, I was curious whether it's always important to you that what the audience would have thought with respect to the racialization or the presence of racialization at that particular moment in time. Without suggesting that it's necessarily important to your argument, I'm just wondering how much that interests you, and if not, or perhaps from another way of putting it, do you think that the racial categories that you're doing such a good job of characterizing in these plays, do you think they were received differently then than they are now? I think that's probably a good way of putting it.
Yeah, thank you. I would say a yes and to that, because there are people like I look at, for instance, tribalism in England, right? And there are these distinctions that still exist today among like the English, the Welsh, the Irish, and all of these tensions that, because I have a good friend, Ben Crystal, he's Welsh and he's an actor, director, but he's even explained this to me, that the way people perceive bloodlines, for instance, is still relevant today. I think how they saw it in their modern or early modern world, I don't know that they was always conscious. We're not always conscious of it today. I see, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, actually, when I do the philosophy talk episode, so I don't want to give too much about that away. But when we look at theater, when we look at pick your favorite TV show, for instance, you can see, if you know these concepts, you can see the operation of the white other and the interracial color line happening in those moments. Like I said, I'll just say this, I like soap operas, and so that's where I sort of situate this. But when we're looking into Shakespeare's time, I don't know that people were always conscious of it, but I don't think it matters. I don't even know that all the artists whose work I'm looking at in the art gallery were conscious of it, because it's, again, as we're able to sort of look backwards to thinking about Ruth's wonderful talk yesterday, we can unearth things that people weren't necessarily conscious of. I mean, I don't think there was a term for tuberculosis at a certain point in time, but it existed, right? And so we're just sort of moving forward and reflecting, I think. But thank you for that question.
Just to wrap things up, we can move down the conversation down the hall to our reception. Let me mention before we conclude, though, that David will be with us, as he's mentioned, for a couple of days. Tomorrow, Also in this same space at 7 p.m., as he just alluded to, he will participate in the recording of the very popular radio show podcast Philosophy Talk. The name of the episode will be Shakespeare's Outsiders. So that's here tomorrow at 7 p.m. And earlier in the day, tomorrow, from 11 to 12, in down the hall in our boardroom, he will lead a workshop for graduate students on the topic, I think drawn from the new book, Hood Pedagogy, Teaching Shakespeare from Within. And you're all, if you're a graduate student, you're welcome to come to that. I think you can either go to the event page for this event and there's an RSVP, but I also suspect you could just show up. There's a couple of slots open. So I don't want to discourage people who have an RSVP if they just want to come.
I'd love to see you there.
Beyond David's visit, let me just mention that we have, as usual, a very intellectually lively spring quarter coming up, and we have many events, but let me just mention maybe the biggest one of the year, which is our annual presidential lecture in the humanities and arts. It takes place this year on April 23rd, 4 p.m. this space, and features one of the leading voices of the humanities in the UK. The classicist is Mary Beard, and she will be introduced by a longtime colleague, friend, fellow classicist, the president of the university, Richard Saller. So please join us for that. As always, in person and hybrid, so you can watch it from anywhere. For now, thank you, David. Thank you all for being here in person and online. And for those in person, please join us down the hall for a very nice reception. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you. Thank you.